Welcome, 11 billion. Recap, emancipation. There will be spoilers ahead. The movie begins with several slaves working on a cotton plantation, being heavily protected by men on horses. In the next scene, a man known as Peter is seen washing his wife's legs. She is known as Dodienne. Peter prays as kids watch on. The Lord is with me. I will not be afraid. What can a mere man do to me? The Lord is my helper. After that, Peter professes his love to Dodienne, his wife, in Haitian Creole. You are the last drop of water in my mouth. And Dodienne, his wife, breathes deeply and replies, You are the sun that warms me up in the morning. Soon after, the door suddenly cracks open, and a man known as Mr. Hurley and another man walk in and ask Peter to leave with no time to say goodbye to his family. Peter's seen been dragged out of his house. As he fights back, then Mr. Hurley points a gun at Dodienne, and this makes Peter calm his aggression. Peter is then hit on the head with a gun and thrown into the horse carriage, caged along with other men held captives as slaves. Shortly after that, a man on a horse, known as Captain Lyons, is seen, sending the man on the horse carriage a message to General Bial. It seems Peter and the other slaves are his best blacksmith. As soon as the horse carriage leaves, Scipio, Peter's son, seen crying and calling him to come back. Upon seeing this, Peter tells his family to stay together. Meanwhile, Scipio then runs towards the horse carriage. Peter promises to come back to him. Soon after, the horse carriage travel across the land and arrive at Clinton, and immediately the men started working on a railway. The next moment, a man carrying a log of wood along with Peter slips and falls after receiving 2 lashes. Peter offered him a hand, but instead, one of the sergeants point a gun at him and tells him he has to say when a man needs help, not Peter. Shortly after that, Peter and the other men working watch as one of the men caught running has been marked with a hot iron on his face. He works for Jimmy Fassel. Shortly after the day's work, the men retired to their cages for the night. While in the cage, Peter asks the man sitting next to him what his name is. His name is Tomas, and he has no family. Upon hearing that, Peter encourages Tomas to remember, this is just work. God is always with them. Upon hearing this, one of the men lying on the floor in chains responds angrily to Peter. How can you say that to him? How can you say God is with us? Where is God? And why has he not set you free? Or has he? You are not in chains. So stand up and praise your God for all he has done for you and for all of us. After that, the man looks at Tomas and tells him, God is not with you. He is nowhere. Can you imagine? He sends that fool to tell us about his word. To be a good slave? To be obedient to your masters? Is that what God says to you? In reply, Peter tells him, God said many things. I do not know why God shows himself to some people and not to others. But if you do not know him, I will pray for you. In the following scene, work continues the next day. The master orders the slaves to go for a water break. Meanwhile, the sergeant ordered Peter to stay on and work instead. After that, one of the slaves walks toward the sergeant to serve him some food. He heard one of the sergeants telling another man, God has revealed his very will to him. Desperate man Lincoln issued Proclamation 95. According to one of the papers from a couple of weeks back, slaves are now running to Baton Rouge from every direction. Shortly after that, the sergeant screamed at the slave for putting something in his stew. Peter looks on as he yelled at the boy. Following this, Peter tells the sergeant he is just a kid. Immediately, the sergeant hit Peter. He falls and gets up, then walks towards the sergeant angrily. Upon seeing that, the sergeant pulls out a gun and tells Peter you must have a death wish. Suddenly, Jimmy Fassel whistled. Then the sergeant stands down. Later at dawn, Jimmy Fassel walks towards Peter and tells him, You walk the earth because I let you are my dog now. Upon hearing this, Peter tells him, Perhaps you will give me some of that fine meat you give your other dog. The following day, Peter is seen in chains and on his knees in front of a barking dog, and Jimmy Fassel sits and looks on. Jimmy Fassel asks Peter if he misses his family. With no reply from Peter, he tells him the dog's got your body sent now. So do I. During the water break, Peter tells Tomas and 2 other slaves. He heard the sergeant saying, Slaves are free. President Lincoln has freed the slaves. Peter then advises them, We must get to Baton Rouge. Lincoln's army is there. It will take them 5 days through the swamp to get there. After that, Tomas cautiously tells Peter there are many ways to die in a swamp. In reply, Peter insists there are many ways to die here too. Shortly after that, the 4 of them agreed to escape. After some time, they all get back to work. Suddenly, one of the men working collapsed and died, and one of the sergeants ordered Peter to carry the man to the grave. The next moment, at the grave, some of the men working there order Peter to dig, and the sergeant asks Peter to receive the shovel and dig. Following this, Peter suspects the sergeant is trying to eliminate him. Suddenly, he fight both men with the shovel and eliminate them, then snatched the sergeant's knife and started running. Upon seeing this, all the slaves at the camp started running as well. Shortly after that, Jimmy Fassel and 2 other men on their horses, accompanied by 3 dogs, join the chase and start running after Peter and the other slaves. Meanwhile, the 4 of them run across an open field towards the swamp. But suddenly, Tomas gets scared and stops running upon seeing an alligator. Shortly after that, dogs jump at him before Jimmy Fassel arrives and asks Tomas, "Where are you going? Do you know where you're going, or you're just running? If I take you back to the camp, they're gonna grind you up like meat. But if you tell me where your friends are heading, I'll let you go." Upon hearing that he will let him go, Thomas, breathing heavily, tells Jimmy Fassel they had an idea to get to Lincoln's army in Baton Rouge, Southwest. The next moment, Jimmy Fassel tells Tomas to go on as he begins to run. One of the boys with Jimmy Fassel screams, "Look here, boss, we got a runner." Jimmy Fassel takes out his gun and shoots Thomas dead. He then tells his boys, "You see a nigger with an idea. Best put him underground." He then asks the boys to split out and chase after Peter and the other slaves. After some time, Peter and the remaining 2 slaves run to a spot under a tree. Meanwhile, Peter then asks the other slave to follow the sound of Lincoln's army cannon gun. Apparently, they all split and run through the swamps. It's harder to track according to Peter. Moments later, Peter is seen bleeding. He runs towards a house and grabs some water to drink, a bedsheet, and potatoes. Suddenly, a little girl spots Peter running. She then started ringing a bell after seeing him running, screaming, "Runner! Runner! Runner!" This suddenly alerts Jimmy Fassel and his boys to the location. Peter hides under the swamp water, holding his breath. Following his trail, Jimmy Fassel and the boys find their way toward where Peter is hiding, but with no trace of him, they left. Moments later, as he tries to get out of the swamp waters, an alligator strikes him. He wrestle, stab, and kill the gator. Following this, Dodienne, his wife, seen having nightmares about him. She wakes up from her dream and tells the kids to never stop believing their papa's going to come back. After some time, an injured Peter was seen on a tree for the night. The following morning, Jimmy Fassel and his boys track back to where they last lost him. Jimmy Fassel ordered his boys to drag the alligator Peter killed the previous day out, and asked them to tear open the stomach looking for signs of Peter's body parts. They find it took her 3 days to die. The last thing she said was, "Why?" Jimmy Fassel tells them he made his way down to Mississippi and found himself here in the swamp. He saw niggers, just like their house girl, running, hiding, and surviving. You see, one gets free, then another, and someday they may return the favor on us. Can you imagine? The following day, Peter is seen robbing mud on his body to kill off his body scent and avoid the dogs tracing him. Moments later, one of Jimmy Fassel's boys tells Jimmy the boy must be dead by now, but Jimmy insists, "Find him." After some time, Peter finds a hut in the swamp. He climbs and finds some water to drink and a burning coal still warm. Following this, he heat up his knife and placed it on the wound he sustained on the lap. Meanwhile, Jimmy Fassel follows his trail and finds traces of his blood. Still at the hut, Peter sights honeybees on a tree. He then climbs to the top and grabs some of the horny bees. Meanwhile, back home, Mr. Hurley walked towards Dodienne, Peter's wife, and tell her a man named Mr. Fabian. She will have to go with him when he leaves. Captain Lyons sold her to Mr. Fabian. Upon hearing that, Dodienne asks if she has displeased Mr. Lyons. But Mr. Hurley replies, not that he knows of. Following this, Dodienne agrees, and she is willing to go with her children. Upon hearing that, he tells her, the children ain't going. Mr. Fabian already has a new husband for her. In the other scene, Peter meet up with the other slave with a gun. He threatened to shoot Peter for leading dogs to him. Meanwhile, Peter pick up some onions and ask him to rub on his body and tell him it will help to kill off body scent. They both immediately run and hide as Jimmy Fassel's dogs approaches. But the dogs still trace the scent of the man with gun. He is at the top of a tree. Upon seeing this, he points his gun at Jimmy Fassel's boys and tell them they do not own him. He is not a slave. He is a man. Suddenly, from a distance, Jimmy Fassel shoot him down. After that, he asks him, "Where is your friend?" With no reply, Jimmy Fassel then stab him dead and cut off his head. In the other scene, Dodienne tells her daughter, Mr. Lyons sold her off. They need to stay together. She has to do something. She tells her daughter to come see her by the gin barn. Dodienne tells her daughter, they need to stay together, which her daughter Betsy asks, is there no other way? In reply, Dodienne tells her, this is the only way. Then she puts her hand into the machine and crush it. In the following scene, Peter watches horses run past him, some in flames. He walks towards a burning house and finds scores of dead bodies on the floor. He finds his way into the burning house, gets some food on a dining table, saw an inquired girl. He try helping her out of the burning house and offer to get her some water to drink. She pull off her necklace with a cross pendant and hand over to Peter, then whispers, God loves you. Suddenly, one of Jimmy Fassel's boys showed up and pointed his gun at Peter. He ordered him to toss the knife off his belt, Peter did, as he watched the little girl dies. Following this, Peter grabs a nail and stabs him in the face and neck. After that, the other of Jimmy Fassel's boys shoot at Peter from behind. Peter quickly grab a gun on the floor and shoot the man. While on the floor, the man tells Peter, you fought that gator and survived. Peter looked at him and tell him, you are the worst kind. Peter hit him with the gun and run. Shortly after that, Jimmy Fassel arrived the scene to see two of his boys down. One of them tried telling it's the same boy. Jimmy rather shoot him dead and continue the chase with his dogs. Meanwhile, Peter then stopped running and wait. He aim his gun and shoot dead one of the dog coming after him. After some time, Peter run towards an open field with dead bodies close to the river and began crawling around looking for food and water. Upon hearing Lincoln's army cannon gun sound across, Peter gets up and began to run towards the cannon gun sound. Shortly after that, Jimmy Fassel appeared from behind on a horse and started wiping down, screaming at him to humble down, to humble down. Meanwhile, Peter remained quiet and just stare at him. Jimmy Fassel then pull out his gun and point at Peter. I told you I was your god, remember? Suddenly, there's a gunshot. Apparently, Jimmy Fassel is hurt. He falls to his knees towards Peter. Peter tells Jimmy, you are not my god. He watches Jimmy, falls to the ground and dies. Shortly after that, soldiers walk towards Peter, and one of them introduced himself as Captain Andre Cayelot of the 1st Louisiana Native Guard. Upon hearing that, Peter asked if they are with Lincoln. In reply, the captain said, yes, we are. Hearing this, then he collapsed. In the following scene, Peter wake up on a clinic bed at a military camp in Baton Rouge. I must get to my family, Peter, seen telling one of the nurse. Peter walked towards one of the army officer for documentation. The officer picked 48 years as his age. Seems Peter has no idea how old he is. He was born in Haiti and worked on Captain John Lyons' cotton farm in Atchafalaya River before they sent him to Clinton to build railway tracks. After that, the officer asked him to keep himself steady. Upon hearing this, Peter tells the army officer, Lincoln said, he is free. Upon hearing that, the army officer tells Peter to extend his compliments next time he sees Lincoln, because right now, Peter is in an army camp during a time of war. The army officer tells Peter he has a choice. Either work on one of the federal farms or join the army and help beat these godforsaken devils. And he will not just get back to his family, but he will help free his family, and his good friend Lincoln will be mighty proud of him. Upon hearing this, Peter joined the army and prepared to fight. Outside, Peter saw Gordon being carried on stretcher. He exchanged pleasantries. Meanwhile, one of the sisters at the clinic showed up with two other men. They were alerted to Peter's condition. With his permission, they would like him to join them for a few moments. Shortly after that, Peter leaves with the men to a room. They ask him to turn his back towards the camera for a picture. In the next scene, Private Peter is in his army uniform, reporting for duty with Captain Cayelot. Meanwhile, the general asks Peter what he saw in Clinton. Peter tells him he saw big cannons and many soldiers. The general then tells the soldiers they've got to take Port Hudson before those reinforcements arrive. Shortly after that, the general asks Peter if he is a fighter or a runner, because all he sees in Peter's picture is disobedience. Upon hearing that, Peter stands still and tells the general he fight them. They beat him up, they sell him, throw him down the well, pull him out and beat him again, and he fight them again. They cut him, burn his neck, burn his feet, they break the bones in his body, more times he can count, but they never break him. Hearing this, the general, seen impressed, tells Peter they'll test that metal, then inform the captain his men will attack at dawn. After some time, the captain addressed them. All of us run over here. As for now, no more running. he tells them. Billy Yank and Johnny Reb fight for money and power, but we are fighting for something more bigger than that. Freedom. We will not ask for freedom. We'll not wait for freedom to be handed to us. We'll take freedom. Moments later, gunfight erupts between Native Guard and Johnny Reb's army. Suddenly, Peter is hit and unconscious on the ground. After some time, he regained consciousness and continued fighting. Shortly after that, Captain Kalo is hit, but he keeps going before finally giving in. Following this, Peter takes over and calls all the soldiers to fight and take over the cannons. He screams, "We must get to those cannons." Upon hearing this, the Native Guard armies fight and eliminate all Johnny Reb soldiers and take over the cannon positions. Shortly after the victory, Peter and the Native Guard armies march towards Atchafalaya River. One of the soldiers tells Captain Lyons, "May God above show no mercy upon your pitiful soul, then shoot him dead." Meanwhile, the Louisiana Native Guard march towards the people, and the captain tells them, "You Forks are now free." Upon hearing this, some ask, "What do you mean, free as in free?" The captain tells them, "Grab your things, you are all leaving." The next moment, Peter's seen going around looking for his wife Dodienne. He finds Dodienne with the kids. They all hugged and pray. The movie ends with Peter and his family on their knees, praising and thanking God for being together again. Peter, iconic image, traveled the entire world many times over. It became the rallying cry against slavery. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more recaps.